and keeping in mind that the court will not permit anyone to plead guilty who claims to be innocent, what is your plea to murder in the first degree, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Mr. Goodale, in order for the court, for me to accept your guilty plea, I must be convinced there's a factual basis. And I'm going to have your attorneys assist you with this next part of the guilty plea. And they're going to ask you about what you did on or about November 2nd of 2021 that leads you to plead guilty to murder in the first degree. Counsel, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Jeremy, like we discussed, I'm just going to have you tell the court what had happened back on November the 2nd of 2021, and if there are questions that I need to follow up in order to fulfill those elements, I'm going to do that. So I'll begin with, what was it that you did on November the 2nd, 2021 that caused you to be here today?
On November 2nd of 2021, I met Willard Miller at Chautauqua Park. I understood that he had the intent to kill Mrs. Graber. Chaden had brought a bat, among other supplies, to go through with the murder. And after he had struck Nohema Graber, we then moved her off of the trail, where I then struck her, and she died as a result. Afterwards, we removed any evidence that we could, and that was my recollection of the events on November 2nd.
Now, to follow up, Jeremy, with regard to premeditation, you understood that Chaden Miller had already essentially come up with a plan to murder Nohema Graber, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you understood that Chaden Miller had brought items to assist in the murder of Nohema Graber. He had brought those items to the park within that day?
Correct. I didn't bring anything with me.
And he had previously asked you if you would assist him if he were to kill Nohema Graber, and you agreed, correct?
Correct.
Just to clarify the record, and you've already made these statements under oath, but on November the 2nd, you observed Chaden Miller strike Nohema Graber first. Is that correct?
Correct. I was posted as a lookout while Chaden struck her in the back of the head with his bat.
And as we've discussed, you understood at that point you had participated in the planning. You were also culpable of what was going on. And upon seeing that Chaden's strike did not kill Miss Graber, you also struck her to ensure that she had passed away. Is that correct?
Correct.
I believe that's an accurate fact.
Anything further from the state?
Judge, we believe that the factual basis that's been recited is adequate for the elements as charged involving Jeremy Goodale. We would ask that the court incorporate the minutes of testimony, if you have not already said that, There is a detailed statement that is attached to those minutes. Mr. Cook referenced that in his factual basis with his client that details out Jeremy Goodale's participation in the murder of Nohema Graber. It would include, as it does in his statement, the planning that went into this particular crime that had occurred for approximately 2 weeks prior to Nohema Graber's death. Mr. Goodale in those minutes details out how Mr. Miller approached him and essentially recruited him to be involved in this, and that it was over a grade that that Mr. Miller had in Ms. Graber's class, and that was provided the impetus and the motive behind this crime that Mr. Goodale then joined into with Mr. Miller and committed. So we'd ask that you incorporate those minutes that detail those particular facts as well.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. So just for the record, the court, pursuant to a stipulation of counsel, is going to consider the minutes of testimony in considering the factual basis for this matter. And is it also stipulated that all these events occurred in Jefferson County, Iowa? Is that correct, Mr. Goodale?
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything else for the factual basis from the state? No. Mr. Goodale, have you fully and completely discussed the charge filed against you and your plea with your attorneys?
I have, Your Honor.
And have you discussed the existence of any possible defenses with your attorneys?
Yes.
And Mr. Cook, other than a general denial, do you know of any defenses that could affect the outcome of this case?
I do not, Your Honor.
Mr. Goodale, are you satisfied with the representation your attorneys have given you in this case?
I am, Your Honor.
And Mr. Cook, have you fully advised Mr. Goodale of his constitutional rights, and are you willing to defend him at trial if he wished to go to trial?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have so advised my client of all his rights, and if he chose to go to trial, I will defend him.
Mr. Goodale, have any threats or promises other than the plea agreement been made to get you to plead guilty?
No, sir.
There are certain rights that you give up, Mr. Goodale, by pleading guilty. I'm going to go through those with you right now. If you continue in a plea of not guilty, you're entitled to a speedy and public trial by jury of 12 people, and their verdict must be unanimous. You could also have your case tried to a judge without a jury if you wished. When you plead guilty, there's not a trial of any kind, and by pleading guilty, you're waiving or giving up your right to a trial. At trial, you'd be entitled to have an attorney represent you, and if you couldn't afford an attorney, one would be appointed for you. At trial, you would have what's called the privilege against self-incrimination. That means you cannot be required to testify against yourself. You'd also have the right at confrontation at trial, which is the witnesses whose names are on the minutes of testimony would have to come into the courtroom, take the witness stand under oath, and testify in front of you, be subject to cross-examination by your attorneys. You also have the right to subpoena witnesses on your behalf and compel their attendance at trial, even if they did not want to voluntarily attend and testify. At trial, you're presumed innocent until the state proves, if ever, that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And Mr. Goodale, do you understand by pleading guilty, you're giving up all those legal and constitutional rights I've just went through with you?
I do, Your Honor.
And is it your desire to waive those rights and plead guilty here today?
It is.
There are certain maximum and minimum penalties associated with the crime of murder in the first degree. Now, this crime usually carries with it life in prison without the possibility of parole, but because you are under the age of 18 when the offense occurred, that there is a possibility of parole. So the maximum term that usually applies to the Class A felony of murder of the first degree, you have a lesser maximum than an adult who committed this offense if under the age of 18. So at trial or at sentencing, it's my understanding the state has said that they're going to recommend a minimum sentence of less than 25 years. Your counsel is free to argue for whatever sentence they feel is appropriate or you want to have ordered, and the court ultimately will make the decision on what the sentence is, but the life sentence with a possibility of parole is required by both the U.S. Supreme Court and the Iowa Supreme Court. There is no fine on a murder in the first degree charge, a felony. There is a requirement that you be jointly and severally liable for restitution of at least $150,000. That's pursuant to 910(3)(b. And that's paid to the heirs of Nohema Graber.